Hey, everybody, welcome back and Happy New Year. This is the Innovation Storytellers Show. I'm your host, Susan Lindner, and I'm beyond excited today. I don't know if you are a regular mass transit user, but I am a New York City native. And as a result, public transportation has formed the basis of my life. I have made friends on the subway. I've run in terror off the subway. I have met even a date or two on the subway. And so the transportation system for most of us urbanites is a central part of living. And that's why I'm so excited to have Emily Yates with me on the show today. Emily is a strategic leader who works to position cities as globally competitive by utilizing a systems approach to develop strategies, projects, and programs that innovate at the intersection of sustainability, technology, and economic development. She is the Chief Innovation Officer for the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, otherwise known to us urbanites here on the East Coast as SEPTA. And we could not get around Philly and its environs without it. Emily works to grow a culture of innovation by incorporating sustainability principles and data-driven decision-making into all aspects of SEPTA's efforts to become a lifestyle transit network for you and for me and anyone who is in desperate need of a cheesesteak. So thank you so much for joining me, Emily. I'm so excited to have you on the show because I'm a power to the people when it comes to transport. I don't want to get into a cab. I don't want to get in an Uber. I want to get where I'm going underground, if possible, as quickly as possible. I have been known to take a crosstown bus. That's okay too. But for me, subways and mass transit have been such a way of life as a New Yorker. And I think for so many of us and so many of my international audience can't imagine life without public transport. How did you wind up getting into this space, especially as an innovator?
Well, thank you first, Susan. I'm so excited to talk with you as well. I don't know how much time we have because it was not a straight path, which is innovative in and of itself. But the short story is I started off in landscape architecture. I wanted to design golf courses.
Wow.
I really liked marrying the idea of a passion of mine, which is playing golf. I grew up with my dad being a golf coach and then in the golf industry in general. And so my fond memories of my childhood are summer evenings spent running down fairways with my siblings and playing ready golf. And that took me to college as well. And so I thought I'll marry my passion for golf and my love of design and design golf courses. And what happened is I ended up going to an amazing school at Arizona State where I was introduced to urban planning as a minor and just learned from some fabulous professors about the space between buildings. And that's where I really found my passion laid rather. And so I pursued a career in urban planning. I worked for the DC government doing neighborhood planning for the area, the core of DC, so Georgetown to Chinatown, and for those of you familiar with DC, U Street down to the mall, and really kind of dove into what impact space has on people. I worked under Harriet Tregoning, and she's one of a few people that I credit with my love for cities. She was the founder of the Smart Growth Movement. And after that, I spent some time in Europe where I was studying climate change adaptation and mitigation and waterfront development. And I lived in Hamburg as a German Chancellor Fellow for a year and a half and really kind of dove into European politics. And that, I would say, inspired my love of transatlantic policy and understanding things that happen in Europe and happen in other cities and how they can be replicated in some ways in other cities. So came back, got married in Montreal and did some work there helping cities, second-tiered cities, do economic development strategies, do city branding and sustainability strategies as well. Hopped to policy at the German Marshall Fund. So actually my former employer at the DC government was working for the German Marshall Fund and encouraged me to apply for a position within her department. And I focused there on sustainable and livable cities. And so the goal of that was to facilitate conversations between practitioners in Europe and the US on sustainable and livable city topics. So things like workforce development, smart cities, energy policy. I did some work around ports and redevelopment. And that I would say is where I think I was most inspired because I was looking at best practices and what cities in Europe had accomplished in terms of a systems change to improve quality of life around transportation, quality of life around workforce, environment, and really kind of get a chance to dig into how things are implemented on a large scale and on a small scale. And looking at cities like Eindhoven in the Netherlands, which is really a hub for innovation, or Amsterdam even, and taking it back to local context within cities like Cleveland or Pittsburgh, and really kind of dig in and take what can be replicated and apply it to that local context. And then through a series of other jobs, I got to be the Smart Cities Director for the city of Philadelphia, where I was tasked with implementing their smart city strategy and standing up a smart cities program. And that was great because Philly is just such a unique city in a way. I remember moving here and being like, what took me so long to realize what an amazing city Philly is?
It is a great city. I go to a Friendsgiving in Philly every year, and I was like, why am I not spending more time here? And like going to New Hope and Lambertville and like all even the cool suburbs outside of Philly, but even downtown Rittenhouse Square, it's just such an amazing city.
It really is. And I think we are a city with a challenge, right? We're a deindustrialized city that's still trying to find its footing. We're known as the largest poorest city in the United States, right? 25% of our population lives at or below federal poverty level. We're a majority city. So we have some really unique local context aspects. We're the oldest city. We have streets that were made for carriages, but then we also have wider streets. So we just have a really, the urban context is so interesting to me.
Right.
I think we were discovered a little bit.
This is that's like a perfect grid, right? We're like, we're walking the streets of Ben Franklin at the same time that we're walking the streets of what is cutting edge innovation.
Exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we were discovered a little bit in COVID when people realized what a great city it was and low cost of living. And we're a short train ride to New York City or DC. But I was able to deploy 14 pilots in that time that I was there for 2.5 years, someone including smart streetlights that did pedestrian counting and kind of removed some tasks from city colleagues. And then this position at SEPTA opened up. And I remember what pleasure it was to work at the DC Office of Planning under the leadership of Harriet Tregoning. And I had read a lot about Leslie Richards and all the great work that she had done. And I thought, I can't miss this opportunity to work under another strong female leader and really drive innovation forward. And so here I am at SEPTA, the 5th largest transportation authority in the United States, with a lot of challenges. We're also, I believe we are one of the 10 oldest transportation systems in the world, up there with London and the MTA and Paris. We're a conglomeration of, I want to say, 5 separate kind of entities that merged together 60 years ago to create SEPTA. But it's a really interesting time to be in transportation.
Yeah, and we need it more than ever, right? I mean, so we're looking at fuel efficiencies, we are looking at electronic vehicles. When you think of smart cities, zoom out for us for a moment, because like the conceptions around smart cities are so different depending on which city you go to, and also the specific needs. When you're thinking about innovating a grid that is as diverse, and I use grid as like the term around the urban plan, let's say, when you're thinking about innovating that grid, how do you begin to conceptualize it? And how do you determine what needs to be innovated to become a smart city?
Yeah, I really struggled with that, actually. That's a great question. I struggled with it a lot when COVID hit, because I just started. I think I was 5 months into the position at the city. And I sat back and I was like, we are going through something that I have never gone through before, right?
No one has,
and then
right?
we had
100 years old.
then we had the uprisings around George Floyd as well in the city, and they were felt really strongly here in Philadelphia. And I was like, to me, chasing this shiny object just doesn't seem like the right space for smart cities to move forward, at least here in Philadelphia. And I really wanted to take the time to think about what smart cities meant to me, what innovative meant to me. And what I came away with was that innovative doesn't mean that you have to be the first to do it ever. It just means it might be the first time you're doing something in your space, right? So in the city of Philadelphia, it might be the first time we're doing something. And to me, that's innovative. But I wanted it to be human-centered. I wanted it to focus on ways to improve the quality of life for all the residents, and not just the residents who can afford to be at the table or who can afford to advocate or who can afford to have a voice. And so it was a tough time. It was a tough time, but what I realized is that COVID was highlighting a lot of the things that we needed to address, a lot of the social inequities that I thought we could use technology and data to really address. And so we looked at things like spatial inequity in the city and how we could use that data to inform our participatory budgeting process. And so the hope was, I left before I was able to make it happen, but to use things like understanding where we had the most spatial inequity and taking
for us, when you say spatial inequity, is that like an even distribution of parks among those in wealthy neighborhoods versus poor? What does that mean to you, spatial inequity?
It's all of the above, right? So if you look at certain communities, you see really well-paved sidewalks, you see businesses thriving, you see trees, you see green spaces, you see a lack of graffiti, you see a lack of broken windows. So, and then in other areas, you see the exact opposite. And we have a lot of areas in the city that meet that requirement of low socioeconomic indicators. We were looking at environmental justice component. So things like high rates of asthma, heat island impact. And then we were looking at things around economic development. And we used a tool called State of Place, which essentially gives a score based on all of, I think, over 150 indicators, pulled from 360-degree images, as well as some information that we input based on census data and whatnot. And it creates a score. It makes recommendations for how you can increase that score. So it's like a walkability score, but a social indicator or spatial indicator in terms of inequity. And we did about a third of the city, kind of finding areas that we knew were like Rittenhouse, which were a little bit more higher end, and then certain communities that were more economically hard hit and had issues like Heat Island. So we know that the neighborhood in Philadelphia called Hunting Park has the highest rate of heat index.
What is that? A heat index?
Heat index is, it's areas that, so there's temperatures throughout the city. So even though the city might be 75 degrees, some areas that lack trees and greenery have a higher temperature. And so those have impacts on quality of life for individuals, and that can create other issues with health and whatnot. And so it's just an unpleasant environment to live in. So we wanted to focus on those areas that really had the indicators that met low quality of life in terms of environmental and spatial impact. And so we were looking at things like, well, could we take participatory budgeting money, focus on one of those areas that had this low spatial equity score, and work with the community to identify what it is that they needed in the community, right? So recognizing that this is the community they live in. I didn't want to come in and say, hey, I know trees would make
life better here.
Life better, yeah, and whatnot, and work with them and work with the police too, because we were trying to like rebuild that trust with police in our community. One of the things that happens is that a lot of times there's not a lot of communication between the police and the communities that they're policing. And if you can create those relationships, you can have additional benefits of understanding, why did this community want to park here? Why are they hanging out here? Or why do they want wider sidewalks? Or you just kind of have more understanding and communication amongst the two groups. So we were looking at stuff like that. And for me, that was what smart cities meant, is just utilizing the data to improve the quality of life for all the residents, and especially the ones that are most hard hit, and doing innovative things that allow us to more effectively address those challenges as a city and provide services as needed. And that's the kind of the mentality that I brought to innovation in SEPTA, where 3 years ago, SEPTA launched a new strategic plan called SEPTA Forward, where it's focusing on transitioning SEPTA from a 9-to-5 service, where we really catered to the commuters. We saw in COVID that complete shift, right? Where everybody can now, we know we can work from home. I'm a prime example of that right now with a sick child at home. And how can we become more of a transit lifestyle transit network? We service our key riders are women, oftentimes with children, oftentimes making multiple trips. The next tier down is really recognizing that 60% of our riders are people of color. And then we service 40% of our riders are people, low-income individuals. And so that target demographic is the demographic that I want to make sure we're addressing through our innovation at SEPTA.
Got you. So, like, it's such a multi-layered intersectional approach, right, to understanding. I think a lot of us hear the word smart cities and we think about EV charging stations. We think about new and improved kind of fuels that are being used in our buses. And maybe it's even looking at new light rail capabilities, right, that might not have existed before to connect us with different regions. So, when you're looking to kind of push forward, given the demographics that you have, what do you take into account as you start to try to balance, like, this is a population that's not going out and buying a new Tesla tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, I think so. You mentioned when you were sharing kind of my background early on, I really think about systems change. And I think innovation is about changing things and making it sustainable, right? I don't want to innovate just to innovate. I want to innovate to have impact. And I think we are on the cusp. The federal government is pushing this transition to zero emission vehicles. And that's great. But what we're seeing is the transition is happening in a certain percentage of income and not in the people, again, who need access to vehicles and who need access to these innovations as well. And so for me, I think that it's okay that we're heading in that direction in terms of fuel changes, in terms of transitioning from internal combustion engine vehicles and all of that. But we really need to think about the systems change that needs to happen. So if we're deploying EV chargers, are we deploying them equitably? You know, that certain communities might not be on the cusp of purchasing EVs, but are we going to further that bifurcation by not installing chargers just because they don't have the vehicles yet? Philadelphia was one of the leading cities in terms of deploying their bike share because they deployed it in low-income communities first. That's not typical. Typically, it's in communities where you'll pick it up and you'll have a quick uptake because people have the capacity to participate in those services. And I think,
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
meaning pay for them, right? And then you potentially have lower issues around theft and damage and things like that. So typically those things start off in pretty wealthy neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we deployed them in low income communities. And I think as we're looking at our transit system and the transition, we of course want to keep in mind things like we don't want to transition in a way that creates costs that we then have to unnecessarily increase our fares, right? We do not want to increase fares. Generally speaking, if we have to, it's because we have no other alternative. But we don't want to create a situation where we have to increase fares. We want to make sure that the services that we're providing and the transitions that we're supporting are not changing our ability to provide services to our riders in a consistent way. So a lot of the innovation work that I'm focusing on now is I oversee sustainability. So clearly there's a sustainability lens and we're looking at zero emission vehicles and how do we support the transitioning of our bus fleet largely because our rail already is powered by electricity. So our bus fleet is where we really want to focus. But how do we do that without impacting service? And how do we do it in a way that allows our buses to be the mode of choice for everyone rather than a personal vehicle? We're looking at how do we get information to our riders that's real time and effective because we know that we want our riders to feel safe on our system. And we've gotten feedback from our riders and largely women that say, you said a bus was going to be here at this time at 10 o'clock at night and it didn't show up for half an hour. I didn't feel safe. I don't want to ride your service anymore. So a lot of the innovation that I'm working on is addressing those kind of challenges that will make riding our vehicles easier and becoming the top choice.
Yeah. And so what does innovation look like now as you're thinking about transportation? Are there projects that you're working on? And what are the stories that you're telling your riders about what's next?
So there are a ton of projects that we're working on. Some of them we're still in the development phase. So it hasn't been actively communicated to our riders necessarily because it's just kind of teeing up the process. In government, procurement always takes a while. It's not the smoothest passage, but I would say one project that I'm really excited about because I see the opportunity for large systems change here in Philadelphia is our zero emission bus transition. We have a target to transition all of our vehicles to zero emission by 2040. It's pretty aggressive, but it is also feasible based on how we transition our vehicles. We have, I want to say, over 1,400 buses in our service right now. We're going through a large scale strategic planning effort called Bus Revolution, which will decrease our need for buses down to just over 1,200. So that in and of itself is an environmental shift right there, right? Less buses that we have to maintain and drive Our buses are all hybrid diesel, so they do have some capacity to drive as a full battery electric bus for a very short period of time. And we're working on projects like that. Quick detour on what I was going to talk about, but that's a really cool project that we're looking at, where we have the capacity to geofence a specific area on a route, and it'll transition the bus to fully battery electric. And so rather than focus on center city, which is generally what historically we have done in terms of testing out pilots, we went a step further and looked at the environmental justice statistics and determined that there are certain communities that have higher rates of asthma that we would like to pilot our battery electric bus period in. And so the hope is that we can reduce some of the particulate, and eventually we'll have fully battery electric buses driving through there as a priority area. But back to the project that I'm very excited about. This is one that I think has massive impact. It's a partnership between the city of Philadelphia and SEPTA. And it's looking at how can we more quickly accelerate our transition to zero emission buses, looking at the horizon. So what we're seeing is, and we're not the only transportation authority experiencing these challenges, we're looking at supply chain issues, right? We saw that again early in COVID, and we know that it's still something that's being worked out. We're seeing workforce shortages of qualified workforce. We recently saw a shift in the bus market in terms of Proterra going bankrupt, removing a battery electric provider out of kind of the space. And then Nova Buses pulled out of the US market and is providing battery electric buses to Canada and that area. So we have a limited amount of battery electric bus suppliers if you're going to purchase new buses. And so what that means is there's going to be a run on buses, and there's going to be a supply and demand issue. We're anticipating that just the remaining bus producers will not be able to meet the demand that comes from the federal government encouraging all the transportation authorities to transition. And so we're really trying to explore a broader toolkit of how do we transition in the amount of time that we've said we would, if we can't purchase buses fully. And so we're looking at retrofitting buses. Sorry, the work from home challenge. We're looking at retrofitting buses to battery electric platforms and or fuel cell platforms, and doing a pilot around that, and really digging into the data. And this could be there are companies in the US and globally. This is a big thing that's happening in Europe right now. So going back to my transatlantic policy space, I've been tracking this for a while of what's happening in Europe and what it can mean for SEPTA. It's a quick way to transition our buses during vehicle overhaul. So our buses tend to run upwards of 15 years. FTA requires 12, but we have amazing mechanics within SEPTA's workforce that can keep our buses running for a little bit longer. And so at the vehicle overhaul at 5 to 6 years, we would completely gut the bus, and our mechanics would implement these battery electric platforms, and we would end up with not a brand new, but basically a brand new battery electric bus. And that would be a quick way for us to accelerate our transition. It would be a more cost-effective way because we're not purchasing a whole brand new bus, and it could, data pending, it could prolong the lifespan of those buses.
Wow, that's not a small thing. I mean, when you think about the investment of a new bus, and frankly, how quickly technology becomes outmoded and outdated, right? If you can retrofit what you already have, then you can wait for those really big incremental changes, as opposed to those, oh, it's just maintenance time again, and it's time to invest. And that's when you really start having to look at budgets in a way that feels almost painful.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really exciting because I think it's foundational, right? If we can figure out a way to transition these buses in addition to purchasing new buses, does that then relay and translate to things like trash trucks in our city, which are a noise issue for everyone? Nobody likes hearing the trash trucks going down your street at 6 a.m. Does it mean that our city vehicles are all going to transition to either a fuel cell platform or a battery electric platform and be more environmentally friendly? Those are the large diesel producing ones that you see spitting black smoke as they go down the street. So I think this is just, in my mind, this is the cusp of something that could be really catalytic for improving the air quality in cities, improving the quality of life. But then there's an economic development component, which also is why I get so excited about this, because these are jobs of the future, right? We do not have enough skilled workforce right now that knows how to manage vehicles that are battery electric or fuel cell powered. And so in installing these vehicles, we also have a training component that allows our mechanics to become more familiar by installing with how to maintain our buses. It creates a lower cost because we know battery electric buses have less moving pieces And so there's an operational savings there as well for SEPTA, which could be really exciting. We still need to get the data on this, but this is hypothetically what we think will happen. And then even more so is the company that we choose to work with. Can we create this hub of retrofitting vehicles here in Philadelphia, which will create jobs for underskilled or unemployed individuals and attract like MTA and WMATA and Pittsburgh's transportation and MBTA to bring their buses down here to be retrofitted and driven back to those transportation authorities. So can we create this economic opportunity here in the city of Philadelphia? And that's why the city's partnering with us on this, because we see a lot of potential to help the city really move forward in this zero emission space.
Pretty incredible, right? That this is what folks in innovation talk about all the time, is that it's not something to be feared. If we actually can leverage the opportunities, then the knowledge that's gained in the process of innovation is one that has cascading benefits that go on for decades if we decide to make the investment and actually train our people to do the work, right? It's like the fear of AI or the fear of what's coming next feels like it's always going to be putting those with the least economic opportunity out of work, when in reality, we could be harnessing that technology to create a workforce of the future. Really fascinating.
Yeah. No, those are the things that both keep me up at night, but get me up in the morning. These are the things that these
Well said.
wicked problems,
Uh-huh.
but that innovation can really be a source of solution. They're complex, right? I'm not just focusing on, oh, we're just transitioning the buses and that's all I'm thinking about. I'm like, who are the broader partners? How do we get the community colleges in? How do we start even earlier and bring these opportunities to students in high school that are doing STEM programs? I think back to my time when I was living in Charlotte.
Yeah,
exactly. There's a report out by Raj Chetty, who is an economist from Harvard, and it talked about lost Einsteins. And it basically looked at patents created as an indicator of economic resiliency in a city. And the thing that really struck me about this report, and it was a really interesting report, and it was very catalytic in what Charlotte as a city was doing around economic mobility, was that it pinpointed that as early as third grade, there's a point of diversion between white males and everybody else in terms of patents created. And third grade is so early. I have an 8-year-old. She's in third grade next year. And to think that's a really catalytic point for her to see what she could do in the future. And it all came down to seeing who was in that space. So a lot of the white male students saw white males creating patents and could see themselves on that trajectory. And they didn't see women or children of color or people of color in those roles of creating an innovation. And so those are the things that I think are really interesting and really great opportunities. Can we get to kids at an early age on things like battery electric technology? It's not going away. It's been here for a while, and it's just going to continue to exponentially grow. Like, how do we start to hit these touch points that are scientifically proven through data to create these opportunities for innovation further downstream?
I just remember winning the third grade spelling bee, but that's about the extent. I don't think I necessarily saw applicable for my spelling at the time, but that was about all I could see in terms of future.
Well, it led you to be a storyteller. So your love of words led you to your role here. I do
think of spelling as kind of casting some kind of spell. When we do it right, we're actually spinning some kind of yarns that take people to a different place.
Absolutely.
But Emily, I'm now going to ask you the three hot seat questions that I ask all of my guests who come on the show. So, what in your mind is the greatest innovation of all time?
Oh, you did not prep me for this. These are secret questions.
No one gets the prep.
The greatest innovation of all time? Oh, man. That's I've never actually even thought about that. I'd have to say the internet.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's a very popular one on the show. So, and we are here to dispel the myth that innovation happens by one individual hero. So if you could join any innovation team in the course of human history, which team would you have liked to have been on and contributed to a cool breakthrough?
I think it would have been interesting to be on Ford's innovation team that built the first hemp car.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And not to mention the entire assembly line process, right, of how to mechanize labor and so forth. And lastly, what's something that really irritates you or would give you great joy to see invented that does not yet exist?
I thought you were going to say, what's one of your pain points in the innovation process? And I was going to say the people who doubt it.
Says the doubting Thomas.
My days are spent convincing people that the risk is worth the reward. Something that hasn't been invented.
Something that irritates you, or something that you would love to see that what you think would have a great impact?
Okay, this is a very South Philly response, and it's somewhat been invented, but not deployed to scale. If anybody's been to South Philly, you know that parking is a nuisance. There's never enough parking spots, and it's largely because people don't know how to parallel park. And so they leave massive spaces between their cars. And you're like, that's easily a car. These two spaces could be one car. And so despite being a public transit rider, I do have a car to visit my parents and to do trips with my kids. But a parking machine that would help people park better would be great.
Oh, fantastic. So all your parking instructors, all your driving instructors out there, it's time. It's time to make sure that people know how to do that. I would love to have two of those Hulk hands that you could just pick up the car and move it closer, move it further away.
Yes, I would support that as a solution as well. I would. And if I could be the first person to try it out on my block, that would be
hydraulic hands to just pick up the car and move it 6 inches forward so you could just get your car in the spot. I love it.
It would add a lot of happiness to my life.
Amen. Amen. And with that, Emily Yates, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Where can people get in touch with you if they have a breakthrough idea that they would like to contribute to SEPTA?
They should reach out to me at SEPTA. My email is eyates@septa.org. I'm probably going to regret sharing that, but I'm always happy to talk with people. And if I can't help them, I'm always happy to try to help connect them to some who can.
Thank you so much, Emily. It was great having you on the show today.
Thank you.